There's something special about the monsters of Doctor Who. Over the decades, the show has introduced some of the most memorable creatures in sci-fi history, with its villains often defining entire eras of the show. The A-tier villains, the Daleks, Cybermen and the Master, are legendary, shaping the series since the 1960s. More recently, the Weeping Angels and the Silence have joined their ranks, becoming iconic in the modern era. Then there are the B-tier villains, those that have returned a few times over the years, often with mixed results. The Silurians were completely butchered in the Hungry Earth, the Sea Devils were crippled by a legacy of a hack writer, sorry legend of the Sea Devils, while the Zygons had potential but got bogged down in modern political messaging. Other recurring threats, like the Ice Warriors, Sontarans and the Great Intelligence, have managed to retain some of their menace over the years, though not always perfectly. Even Sutekh, arguably one of the best villains Doctor Who has ever produced, was brought back, and we all know how that turned out, but I went over that recently. But what about the C-tier monsters? The ones that showed up once, left a lasting impression, and then vanished into obscurity. Some of these creatures were genuinely terrifying, yet for whatever reason the BBC never saw fit to bring them back. That's what I want to focus on today, the monsters that should have returned but never did, despite being prime material for a comeback. In this series of videos, I want to take a closer look at these forgotten horrors, analysing what made them work, why they disappeared, and whether there's something special about them that could justify a return. Some of these creatures were pure nightmare fuel, others had rich storytelling potential, and a few may have simply been ahead of their time. The question is, could they be revived in a way that does them justice? Or are they better left in the archives, victims of lost potential and BBC indifference? Let's find out. Welcome to the Snake Pit, where we're full of bile and venom. I'm your host, Snake Daemon, and today we're diving deep into Doctor Who's forgotten horrors. The monsters that deserve another chance, but have been left to rot in the depths of the BBC archives. One of the biggest missed opportunities has to be the weed creature from Fury from the Deep. The sentient seaweed terrorized an offshore drilling operation, spreading like a parasite, infecting people and turning them into its mind-controlled servants. It was eerie, simple and incredibly effective. The possessed oak and quill, with their silent, gas-exhaling menace, remain one of the creepiest moments in classic Doctor Who, even with only a few surviving clips. The concept of the weed creature is pure sci-fi horror. It attaches to a host, grows and spreads much like the Thing, leaving paranoia and destruction in its wake. And yet, after Fury from the Deep, it's barely been mentioned. Why? On the surface, pun intended, it seems like a monster that's ripe for a comeback. It's a natural fit for Doctor Who's style of horror storytelling, and it even has built-in history. The Whoniverse claims that mariners documented its existence as early as the 18th century, meaning there's a perfect opportunity for a Doctor Who purely historical episode, the kind we haven't really had in decades. Imagine the Doctor arriving in the past, stumbling upon an ancient encounter with the weed creature, and realizing that he was part of the legend all along. A proper historical horror story, done right, would be a breath of fresh air for a show that's been drowning in modern political messaging. But let's talk about what makes the weed creature truly terrifying. It's not just a monster, it's a force. It doesn't need an army, it doesn't need weapons, it simply is. And the horror comes from the fact that it slowly takes over without anyone realizing it until it's too late. The idea of people being mentally absorbed into its hive mind, whispering its commands, completely losing their sense of self, is genuinely chilling. It's body horror at its finest. And what makes this monster even more unique is that, unlike so many Doctor Who threats, it isn't an alien. The weed creature was, after all, supposedly native to Earth, just like the Silurians and Sea Devils. It wasn't some invading force from beyond the stars, it was always here, lurking beneath the waves, waiting. That opens up so many storytelling possibilities. How long has it existed? How many times has it risen? Is it truly mindless, or is there some ancient intelligence behind it? The potential is endless, and yet the show has never explored it. Now, picture how this could be handled in a modern episode. The infection starts subtly, people behaving strangely, speaking in low, rhythmic tones, their eyes a little too glossy. The Doctor suspects something is off, but doesn't realize the full extent of the threat until the sea itself begins to turn against them. And when the weed creature finally reveals itself, instead of some CGI monstrosity, it should be a practical effect. Tendrils of living seaweed wrapped around its victims, pulsating and whispering with unnatural intelligence. It's the kind of horror that Doctor Who used to excel at, creeping dread rather than jump scares. And given how much the modern show tries and fails to be scary, this would be a perfect chance to prove that it still can be. So why hasn't it returned? One possible reason is the production limitations of the original story. The final scene of Fury from the Deep was so foam-heavy that it had to be shot in one take, which may have left the BBC hesitant to revisit it. But that's hardly an excuse in today's age of CGI and practical effects. If Doctor Who can bring back the Zygons, redesign the Ice Warriors, and even turn the Macra into giant monsters, then there's no reason why they couldn't modernize the weed creature. Or maybe, just maybe, it's because the showrunners never thought about it. That wouldn't surprise me at all. Doctor Who has a habit of ignoring some of its most terrifying concepts in favor of playing it safe. Instead of looking back at what actually worked in the past, they keep pushing dull, forgettable villains that no one cares about. Swarm and Azure, anyone? And here's the thing. Bringing back the weed creature wouldn't just be a nostalgic nod to the past. It would be an opportunity to tell a different kind of Doctor Who story. A true historical horror episode. A slow burn thriller that builds tension rather than rushing through a plot in 45 minutes. A chance to show the Doctor facing a threat that isn't just another alien invasion, but something more insidious, more primal. Imagine if they did it right. If they leaned into the paranoia, the body horror, the isolation of fighting something that doesn't need to fight back because it's already won. Imagine an episode where the Doctor has to struggle not defeating the weed creature, but just to contain it before it spreads too far after all. If he destroys it now, he couldn't have faced it in his past, causing damage to the web of time. The truth is, Doctor Who has a vast well of underused monsters that could make incredible returns if handled correctly. And if they really want to prove they can still make Doctor Who scary, bringing back something as unnerving as the weed creature would be a great place to start. Thanks for dropping by the Snake Pit, where we thrive on untapped potential and lost opportunities. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell like the video, and leave your opinions in the comments, where naturally I won't read them. Until next time, stay venomous.